All right. So welcome, guys. Today, Perry and I are going to be talking about product-to-project mindset using the case study of the Royal Ontario Museum's rebuild. There we are, and here we are. I'm Breanne. I'm the Director of Strategy and Growth at EvolveDrupal.
And I'm Perry Sheppard, the Manager of Web at the Royal Ontario Museum. Excellent. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the ROM is Canada's largest museum and one of our most preeminent field research institutes. So I joined ROM in April of last year, and on my first day they asked me to redesign their website. So that was kind of the intro to ROM. So really quickly we realized we needed to mobilize the team, make sure we understood what we were looking to do, and rethink what we'd done in the past. So, ROM's website is currently in Drupal 7, and yes, that is what it looks like. With the last refresh happening over 5 years ago, we really needed to take a look at changing from a product mindset to a project. I mean, what I mean by that is that over the time of the last 12 years, I guess it would be, interest in the site had waned. So people had moved on, they stopped really paying attention to it, and ultimately we had a loss of knowledge continuity. Iterative updates were made in isolation with minimal oversight, and content governance in large part had been abandoned. So last fall, we decided to partner with Evolving Web and LG2 to reimagine our website and relaunch in Drupal 10. Our deadline is November of this year, and we realized early on that we needed to change our working paradigm from product to project.
Awesome. So I feel like this is controversial, and I hope that maybe I tempted some of you in here, because everything you see is, okay, moving to product mindset, moving to product mindset. And I always like to challenge some of those road rules, like there's only one way to do it. The kind of, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think, there's a lot of parts of product management that are the reality of folks who are running websites, and it's really, really important. But when you get into something like a rebuild, you have this massive amount of legacy, and you have this massive mission to bring things with you and to not leave things behind. And so some of those project principles of being a little bit more waterfall and having a little bit more control and timeline and budget start to come into play. And so we wanted to talk about kind of bringing some of those skills in so that you can have a successful rebuild and get back to product mode. And I wanted to start with some of the common pitfalls that we see. So obviously, Evolving Web, we do lots of rebuilds and migrations. And so I ran around the office asking everyone, what are the biggest challenges and pitfalls that you see when your clients are trying to do this type of project? And one of them, if you were here for Adrienne's presentation earlier, content came up. That is a huge part, and whether it's understanding the content you have, or thinking about how you're going to migrate it, or creating content to fill in this beautiful new design that you have, it's something that often catches people out and it gets underestimated. Struggling to prioritize. People like things they have. Perry and I were talking about that. It's very human not to want to lose anything, and so having those difficult conversations around the organization of, hey, this thing that you've had and you've loved, well, maybe it's not used, and maybe we won't bring it, and that's definitely something that gets challenging. Getting unclear on decision maker, as Perry said, a little bit of loss of interest. When you're in that product mode, you can focus on the primary stakeholder of that piece that you're bringing out or that feature. When you do a migration and a big rebuild, you now have to talk to a lot more people. It's on an executive level visibility, and so you have to take into consideration a lot more stakeholders than usual. And lots of folks forget about their digital ecosystem, and the ROM's really interesting for that. They have a really complex and cool ecosystem of tools, and so not forgetting how that website and how that primary piece fits into everything else that they're doing in their digital space.
Right, so the day-to-day maintenance and iterative updates of a mature website might not be of interest to key stakeholders. However, a major redesign definitely will be. So it has a real tendency to attract a significant number of new players and individuals who really want to influence the site redevelopment. So you'll need to accept that as part of your sort of paradigm shift, and you need to definitely ensure that your project team is on board with that, because there's going to be a lot of fingers in the pie. And oftentimes what you'll see is project teams going to rail against that because they're used to working iteratively, very quickly, a more agile approach, fewer people in the way, as it were. So that paradigm shift is really important. My suggestion is to find a project co-lead. You are going to take vacation, you're going to have bad days, and it really helps to keep the project moving forward. You can help each other along the way, and again, right, moving from sort of a product maintenance cycle into a project cycle, having that co-lead is really going to help. Along the way, you need to define how sign-offs are going to occur. So again, this is going to be a little bit different than a product, right? So sign-offs for a redesign are going to go up a couple of levels. For us, we actually have to have sign-off at least director level, which is one below the chief executive officer. So from a visual design perspective, we have the chief communications officer signing off. When we actually get to the full design in a few weeks, to present that, we are definitely going to need top-level sign-off on that. Along the same lines, you're going to want to determine a governance process. So if you don't have one in place already, gathering a committee together of individuals that represent the different departments or subgroups at your organization is very helpful. That's what you're seeing here. This is our governance model. And this is not a design by committee approach. This is actually going to get you access to the SMEs that you need, easier access to lower level executives, and will help you throughout the process to keep things moving. Organizing the group also helps to socialize the message. So when you start into a redesign, there might be rumblings, people hear a rumor, oh, I hear you doing something. As you get a group together of this sort, they'll start to socialize with their teams. Which really helps get the message out, gets the energy level up, and gets people involved. And that's really what you want. And again, right, the mindset change. When you're in a project, you're pretty isolated. When you go into, in a product, you're pretty isolated. When you get into a project mode like this, there's a lot more involvement, and you really do want that. Set expectations, define and clarify. So one of the things we talked about very early on is the difference between absolute time, duration, and effort. So make sure that everybody's talking the same language there. And finally, let the experts lead. So you've probably heard this before, but what that really means is the subject matter experts are experts in their area of expertise, not in website redesign. So if somebody comes to you and says, we need this feature, ask the question, why do you need that? What's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Because you're the expert, not them. They're the expert in whatever their area of expertise is. So make sure that that's clear to everyone along the way. So time. Setting expectations in a project early is very important, and definitely the time commitment expectations, including for executive. So one of the things that we did was we sat down with the executive team and said, if you want to be heavily involved in this project and you also want it to launch on time, you need to make a time commitment. And as a result, we did get a fair bit of time at the outset with the executive team to sign off on the major portions of the project early on. And that kept the project moving. It could take up to 6 weeks to schedule a meeting with this group. So if you can imagine, 4 meetings, 6 weeks delay, 24 weeks, that's almost a year after a while. So what we actually calculated is that a full year has about 10.5 months. So after you take in vacations, holidays, executive sign-offs, delays in the life cycle, you have about 10.5 months per year. And so it's essential to ensure that the team, including the executive team, understand the time commitments.
Yeah, and I love, there's a little story from the ROM project, but remember Perry telling us at the beginning, if you you don't send that email today, you get busy, you don't send it. If you do that once a month on a 1-year project, you're losing a month of time. So it starts to get on a big project like this, when you're not just doing a 2-week sprint and getting it out the door, all of a sudden that I'll send it tomorrow decision that you take once a month can impact your final timeline significantly.
So now you have your team ready, and what you need to figure out is, what does success look like? So this is a really simple but effective tool to help you identify and clarify your overarching goals. So it's similar to begin with the end in mind, if you're familiar with that. But essentially, the story that you tell helps you define what success might look like in the future. So you might say, all right, in a year I want to put in a bid for a website redesign award. So what would that look like? Or in a year I want to tell the story of this is why our website successfully launched. So ultimately, going through this process helps you define what success might look like for you, and helps you define your criteria in a really accessible way. It also includes those hard goals and soft goals. So hard goals being things like deadlines, technical requirements, legislative requirements, accessibility, and then the soft goals such as brand alignment and refresh content. I'm terrible with the mic, sorry about that. Write the story down and then revisit it throughout the project. So once you have that story, don't just set it aside. We actually have a regroup meeting in 2 weeks, and we'll be doing exactly this, which is to say, we told a story to ourselves 6 months ago about what this was going to look like. Are we still on track? And it's really important, and it really helps because you can adjust accordingly and make sure that along the way, you're not losing sight of your overarching goals. Having said that, be prepared to adjust as new insights are uncovered, and project imperatives do change, like budget sometimes. So what does this all look like? Again, it actually is our current website. So having gone through this process, told ourselves a story, this is what we have come up with as potentially an imagination of the future.
Yeah. So your first takeaway, which I think you can see in all of what Perry has shared, is your work starts well before the project.
All right, so research and discovery can be undertaken in a variety of ways. And many of your organizations will already have established sets of data. However, in a full redesign, it is important to take some time to revisit what you think you know and reevaluate. In addition, information is only effective when it's accessible. So as an example, ROM has great insights, fantastic. We connect with our constituent groups in focus groups on a regular basis, at least every 2 months. Our audience segment data is summarized into 12-page documents. Absolutely unusable in a website redesign. So we develop personas from those. You can see a small photo of those up there. Ultimately, though, you need to ensure that you validate your assumptions. Again, going from a product lifecycle into a project lifecycle, it changes. There are more eyes on it. You also expect that if you're moving into a project lifecycle, your product is pretty old, which means your data might also be fairly old. Content evaluation. Those numbers are correct. We immediately identified in our content audit 500 plus pieces of content that need to be deleted immediately. So part of the reevaluation is also digging into your content. And this is a deep dive. We had probably 50 people involved in the content review. The document is 36 pages long, thousands of lines, and every piece of content has been reviewed. Like I said, 500 pieces to delete, 30 active content types, 71% of those pages haven't been updated in over 12 months. So really digging in also gave us the opportunity to understand our data, and it helped when we got into our content model review. So it really helped us understand, as the individuals leading the charge, what we were talking about. So going through that content review also made us very familiar with the content that we were talking about and trying to design for. So hopefully, at the end of this, you can optimize your content model as well.
So our second lesson for you is check or validate what you think you know before you head into a major project where all of that data is going to be used for really big decisions. And we're going to get into designing for impact. Deciding what to build. So we talked about that. One of the pitfalls that people get into is, what are you going to build? What are you going to bring with you? And it's something where defining these bubbles and, you know, how big are they? How much room is there in the must-have? And that's where you can lean back on, you know, your use cases. What are those critical paths? What are the things that absolutely have to exist and be there? And the risk that you take if you overfill that must-have bucket and you put everyone's dreams in there is that you will never get back out of your project and into product mode. So being a little bit ruthless with yourself, revisiting over and over, taking it down a level of detail as well. If you're struggling, okay, well this thing kind of half fits in this bucket and half fits in that, can I split it apart? And can I think about what I'm gonna do in the future once I've launched and what I have to do today to bring over the things that I need to be successful.
Huh. Okay, so this, really quickly, as I've said, obviously our site needs a little bit of work, and that's why we're going through this process. Our mission information is presented in this way currently on our site. When I presented a problem of this nature to our lead visitor experience, she said, no, our hours are very simple. Go to the next slide. However, this is not accurate. We are open late every third Tuesday of the month. As well, that's a contradictory term. So technically, we are not closed Mondays. We are, in fact, there are 32 exceptions in the year. So that doesn't really do the job. And I presented this to Breanne and the team generally and said, we need to fix this because every long weekend I get a call that people don't know if we're open. And literally, every long weekend. So this is one potential approach. We haven't fully refined this yet, but this was sort of a preliminary, hey, maybe we should present it like this. Another use case came up, which was, we call them the long-term planners, which are people that don't live in Toronto, but they're coming to visit in 6 months. So they want to know when we're open, and obviously that doesn't do it. So we started talking about this like really dynamic way with all the gadgets and being able to check this box and do this thing and filter, and ultimately we're like, well, hold on. Why don't we just list all the dates? If they're planning long term, well, that kind of does it. And it's a very, very niche group. So ultimately, the point here being, and Bree, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing here is, again, we were talking about that prioritization, making sure you're having the impact, and making sure you're not over-complicating the thing in the context of a major project. The opening hours, there's a lot of other things that we need to do, but it was so interesting that we got stuck here, and it was because of so many of the factors we talked about. It was who is the decision maker, what is the actual story, what did we really prioritize, and what do we need to be baseline successful? And this, you know, edge case user story that was very attached to by the executive group was something that we really had kind of sent us down a rabbit hole, and we had to bring ourselves back to simplicity and bring ourselves back to the basics of what we're trying to do. I wanted to share this quote too because it was such a great moment. We were in a design review and Alex, who's one of the co-founders, was looking at the work that we've done, and as you've seen a few sneak peeks, it's really beautiful and we're really excited about it. But he came up and said, okay, cool, I'm sure the ROM's original website looked great in Figma. And it sent us back, you know, and thinking about that hours table, part of the simplicity there was, okay, can I automate this? From what the team are doing in the back end, from what the folks are putting in, do I really need to make another page that someone needs to go and manage and update and babysit in this massive complex ecosystem? And so we went back and looked at, you know, how are these things going to live once they come to life and they're out in the world and you have people interacting with them. And so we went back through the design with that in mind. So just remember, if you're doing a major rebuild, you are building for tomorrow. And we're going to kick up the pace because I'm getting the 1 minute flag. So taking the go, no go decision, obviously at some point you need to put that back into the world and move back into product mode. So, you know, there's never a perfect time. It's never perfect. There's always one more thing you could polish and do. Again, when you think about those buckets of prioritization, right? Those things I, you know, maybe should do or could do, you know, using, moving back into product mode to talk to your stakeholders about, like, I'm not going to launch it and leave it alone. I'm going back into product mode. We're going to iterate. We're going to have sprints. We have ideas that we're going to move forward with. We have content we can still continue to fill in. And once you get back in that mode, then you have user feedback and it's live and it's living and you can continue to improve.
So when you get there, revisit that story, check to make sure that you haven't lost sight of any of those overarching goals, and ultimately revisit as needed. When you launch, it's back to iterative process and testing and checking with your audience groups.
All right, so that's it. Launching is just the beginning. Thanks, guys. I'm assuming we have no time for questions, but Perry and I will be around up here if you want to come see us.
I can take your question.
Okay, we have permission. Does anyone have a question? Yeah.
Wonderful presentation. Really enjoyed it. I have a question. Well, how do you handle too many stakeholders' opinions?
The question is, how do you handle too many stakeholder opinions? Everyone has an opinion, that's great. Go back to your data. This is why regathering insights, if you don't have insights, getting them, definitely important. One of the things you need to avoid is made-up use cases. That's what I find most of the time with executive. They'll say, well, we need to do this because my cousin did XYZ. Ultimately, so validate that, but go back to the data. And that really helps to drive the discussion. Particularly if you're, so there's a process called objection handling. If you present it prior to the objection, it's usually more effective, so it doesn't seem reactive. So if you can present in advance that your process is data-driven, so your decision-making is all data-driven, it also helps to guide that discussion. Ideally, you avoid through that presentation.
Yeah.
Share what you chose for your story.
Sorry, Stephen?
Can you share what you chose for your story?
For your story. The story. You chose for your story.
Oh, what I chose for my story. Oh, I actually used the, we're going to apply for awards in a year. What is that going to look like? That's actually what I did because, well, I assume we're going to win a bunch of awards. So. However, I did use a lot of the data and this, I won't say story because it wasn't exactly a story, but the marketing team had presented sort of a wish list, and I just modified that into a story. I'm a big fan of film, and it really aligns with my approach. Ultimately, the story is that when people visit our site, it is entirely accessible. When the government visits our site, it is entirely meeting the legislative needs because we are a governmental institution. Our visitors find the information that they want quickly, are engaged, blah, blah, blah. It's a little bit more flowery, but ultimately that.
Last call. We're around. Come find us. We'd love to chat.
Thanks so much.